Where are you guys from?
I'm based in Lisbon.
Chicago. Spain.
I'm based in Munich.
Oh, nice. I'm in Munich as well.
Oh, who's this?
Nicolay.
Nicolay. Oh, okay. Hi, Nicolay.
Nice. Norway, Netherlands, European crowd, and one American. Nice, perfect. So Demetrius told me to keep it pretty open and more like roundtable discussions. So, if anyone has any questions he wants to start with, just shout it out or throw them in the chats. Otherwise, I can just talk a little bit of like how I approach most of the agent projects, and then we can take it from there, whatever is your preference.
If you can start with going or what decomposition task means, it's good to be vague.
Yeah. So what I mean by decomposing tasks is basically breaking down something complex into a set of like simple steps. And how we usually do it at my company when we're building something like that is we sit down with subject matter experts and really look at how they are doing their work and really try to note down every like little detail of how they approach it, what they are doing, and then basically use that to create the agent.
Is it scalable?
Yeah. So for us, it has like a way higher success rate because I think like most people start in the opposite way. They try to solve a very big task and have a very high failure rate, and we approach it in the opposite way. So we take the subtasks, look at which subtasks are the most valuable, which in most cases is the one which takes the most time, and then basically try to solve this one. And if we can't solve it yet, we have to go even more fine-grained and break it down even more. And it's an iterative process to basically figure out, okay, what's the right solution for a problem and how can I solve it with an agent? And it isn't this hellhole where you end up with like multi-agents where you don't know like where is the error I'm at the moment facing, where is it even coming from?
Can you tell me how that decomposition using a human expert, how it's integrated with the entire life cycle of building an agent? Do you do it at the beginning or do it iteratively?
We do it at the beginning. So we do this once basically to understand the problem, understand the task, break it down, and then basically build a solution for it. So
ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ ರೀ ಟೀ ಆಯ್ತು ನೋಡ್ರಿ ನೀವೇನ್ ಮಾಡತ್ತೀರಿ
So Carlos asked whether like what frameworks we are using. It's different. I don't like LangChain or the other like Crew AI neither, like the multi-agent, multi-chat frameworks. I tend to roll my own or go with something like LangGraph, which gives me a lot of flexibility to build like graphs, build DAGs, but also like build really complex control flow to use LLMs at certain points in the process for making decisions, writing texts, analyzing content, and not really going into like the multi-agent part like with Crew AI because we never found any success with it.
Me either.
Yeah.
I think Crew AI is it's a very nice story, but when I actually do it, it's oversimplification of the hard problems. Can you tell me about if you can highlight some of the success or fail stories you had?
Yeah. So let's start with the failure, I think. And this was really, we tried to build an agent for basically data cleaning. In the end, we really broke it down into a bunch of steps, but we always had to leave a lot of flexibility in there because every data set in the end has like data points which fail in a different way or are wrong in a different way. So we really like had to have the agent be able to code as well. And this was really hard to do. Like it always, like especially with text data or string data, when it has to do some reformatting and stuff like that, it never got it right and it never could really get the code down. But this was also a while ago. So this was with like GPT 3.5. So I would be curious whether with like Sonnet and stuff like that, with the better coding models, this would actually be possible now.
Mm-hmm.
And success stories, like we built an agent for like getting certain pieces of information from websites. And the agent is basically navigating through the website and searching for the information where it is and then extracting it. And this works really well. Like we got it now to a task completion rate for like 80% and 10% of the failure or 50% of the failure cases. So 10% from the 100% are just because the website doesn't have the information in a way that we actually can process it.
And for the success story, do you know what the things you did was the main cause of success, like applying React pattern or something else?
In the end, it was really the breakdown of the task. And it was also using LLMs only in places where they were really necessary. So for making certain decisions, like for example, I have like my state. So we really constructed a really big state, which gave all the information. So on which website am I at the moment? Which information am I still looking for? What information do I already have? And then basically giving it like, what options do I have to navigate to? And then it only has to pick an option, as opposed to like freely predicting like, okay, where should I move to? So these are like the two. We decomposed the task and also restricted the output space the LLM has, and also you only used it in places where the capabilities of an LLM are actually very well suited for.
Okay, thank you.
How do you, so first of all, like Pydantic AI is really hot recent release. I didn't try it yet. Have you played with it yet, Albert? I'm just so sure I butchered that name. Yeah. Yeah, I would love to try it, but it's like agent frameworks. It's such a bubble right now. There are so many, and in the end, I try it and I roll my own stuff.
I
How
want
do
to hang
I?
out with experience with agent frameworks that's part of the cloud providers, like Prompt Flow on Azure or Agent Builder on GCP.
I use Prompt Flow once because we had an Azure project and had to use Azure. I didn't like it. So it's also, I think Microsoft, like the documentation in most cases is not as good. But I think it was decent. It just didn't fit our use case. And I think this is the issue with most frameworks. They restrict you very much that at some point you just have to break out of them.
But you can say the same about the LangGraph.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why we didn't use LangGraph in the end as well. Nice. Eric asked, how do you decide on the scope boundaries domain of your agent? But I think like since I'm working as an agency, like the domain is often given. The scope is something I want to always be very flexible in because I think like in most cases you want to go onto like a really big scope, which often leads you down wrong path. So I want to solve something that's valuable from the start, so it saves a lot of time. It's often also something that people do not really want to do, because in the end, if you're building agents, you're automating work away. So you have to be adopted. So you should automate something away that the people don't want to do, but it still takes a lot of time, so it's valuable. And also it's like small enough that you actually can build a good prototype or solution to actually showcase what you're building very fast, so you actually can get buy-in. And I think like whether you're working internally for a company or whether you're working as an external consultant, I think these three factors are very important to actually get buy-in for AI, because otherwise you're just getting stamped over.
When you were working on drilling down to like the most fine-tuned tasks, like you mentioned with those SMEs, like what's an example of like how fine you were getting and like what was that line for you?
Yeah, so for example, that's a good question. Which one will I take? So when we did, like, for example, I built an agent as well for like more of a small bank use case, where we did like report generation in the end based on market news and stuff like that. And in the beginning, we didn't want to start with like a full report. So we only took like in the end the most challenging part or most time intensive part for them as well, which was the generation of a graph which displayed the data very well. And this is something we took because it's very time intensive, but it's still scoped enough that I can actually do it very fast, and I'm likely to find a good solution in a limited amount of time.
Is there an example where you were thinking that it was small enough of a task and then it ended up being too big?
I think like the data cleaning part, I would have expected really that the code generation for like specific transformation of the data would have worked way better. But in the end, probably we would have had to break it down even more, because we only gave it like in pandas the head of the data, so like the first few rows as text, or like what's wrong with it based on our analysis, and then told, okay, write the transformation. So you probably should have broken it up even further, and made multiple steps out of it. Maybe first tell, okay, identify the column which is relevant, then maybe extract it, and then write the transformation only based on the list and not on the entire data frame.
Okay. And when you're breaking those down and starting to create this, like how involved are those other stakeholders in the process? Like, are you keeping them with you throughout this entire breakdown, so they can weigh in on how the tasks are going?
Yeah, in the end, since you're working for them or your tool will be used by them, I like to keep them involved. Like, for one, just to have a champion who is advocating for you as well. And for the other, it in many cases you can't judge the output quality, so you need some form of expert to actually do it. And if you can show them some good stuff all the time, keep them in the loop, and just like send them a few outputs. Hey, today I did this. Like, what do you think of that? Stuff like that. Show them a prototype. Like, just fire up a Streamlit front end, which is like a few hours of work, and just let them throw in some input and get some output. And most people are pretty impressed if you can do that in like a week or two. And you can really like drag them along and get them excited on the project as well. So Eric asks, can you maybe elaborate on how to get the most out of domain experts? What kind of questions do you ask? How do you transform questions, answers in instruction tools, models for the agents? So I answer the last part first. How do you transform question and answers in instruction tools, models for agents? We mostly do with actually the output. So when we have built like the first version, we like to present them the output and collect written feedback. And often you literally can take like the feedback from the experts, like one to one, and just put it in the prompt. What kinds of questions do you ask? I don't like to ask so many questions in the beginning. I like to just watch them. Like, what are they doing in the end, and how are they doing it? And then at certain points where they're making decisions, try to get them to elaborate why they're making this decision, and rather observe and then get them, when they're making a decision or taking an action, rather explain why they're doing it, because the certain actions aren't that important. Like, you note them down, they could become your steps, but the most important part is actually why they're doing it. And this is something you actually have to like really drill down in, because often for them, it's really self-explanatory. And here you really have to be like the dumb one, like really drill down until you get it and not stop like, okay, why are you doing that? And they are giving an answer and you don't understand it. But really drill down, be stupid, and ask them a lot of follow-up questions to really get it. Okay, Maria asked, which models give best results? Do you find it's task specific? Which models do you stay away from? In my case, I think like the best results often isn't the biggest issue. On occasion, we are very limited by the amount of load we have. So we often can't use Anthropic because the concurrency limits are too low for us. So we have to use OpenAI or Azure. And also, like if you're working in corporate context, especially in Europe, same thing for like data privacy. Often you have to use Azure because they're making the necessary guarantees. Otherwise, I would say it's really, I like to use a mix of models as well, because it's not like agent flow specific. I would even say it's task specific. I found Gemini to be really good at vision tasks, like when I'm feeding in images, and it's really cheap. Then GPT-o1, when you have to do like heavy reasoning, so in the report generation, o1 just excels at that. So it's not just like which model, but also like which model family or provider in the end. And here you really have to play around. And I think I would filter it down. Which model providers are you even allowed to use? And then basically which model performs the best, and also which model has the required latency and also the required cost. Because at some point, if you solve a task with o1 and spend a lot of money, at some point it isn't worth it anymore to solve it with AI because it's just too expensive.
If I could follow up on that really quick. Open source, do you ever find that you have to use open source? Or if you do, which model would you pick? And do you fine tune?
I fine tune. In open source, when we go with open source models, it means we are in a like more privacy constrained environment, so we have to be pretty secure about it. Which means we have to deploy on their own servers, and then we are really limited by hardware in most cases. So we go with really small models, which is a big challenge. And to be honest, like agent workflows with small models, it's very hard to pull off, because anything that requires like real reasoning and also like coding, for example, which is a little bit more complex, is getting really tricky. So I would rather first think about, okay, can I desensitize or privatize the data in some way that I can actually send it out? This would be like my first option if I have a more complex task. If not, I would probably just go with the defaults. If I need something really powerful, I like the Mistral models. Also, the big llama ones are really good. If you have to go really small, the Quen family is really good. Phi by Microsoft as well. Nice. Harvard again. You need to step in and correct my pronunciation at some point. Do you use some framework to validate or evaluate test responses to optimize prompt model params? I have not found a framework yet, to be honest, that satisfies my needs, because I like to evaluate while I build the application and also in production. Basically, I use the same evaluation in both cases, and when I'm basically developing, I have for like each prompt or each output, I basically have an eval suite which consists of heuristics, which could consist also of LLM as a judge. And they basically just look at the output and score it. Mostly it's a binary score. And then I basically have a weighted average, which evaluates the new prompt and I compare it to the old prompt. But I also use that in production. So basically as a validation, I just score all the outputs, and for each different score I calculate, I just basically include a variable in the return, whether it's like a breaking condition or not. And then based whether it's a breaking condition, I can regenerate, or I can give the model feedback, or I can throw an error. And by breaking condition, I mean, for example, like it's not good enough to go on. So I basically want to stop the process or repeat something. And always interject if something isn't clear. How do you set up ongoing evaluations? Specifically, how do you reduce the SME time required on creating 2A pairs? What do you mean by SME time?
One of the things that we've noticed is we have like the business side, specialists, right? So as we scale up these solutions, the amount of time required from them to do like evaluations or give us ground truth data just keeps going up. So I was curious to know if I think you just mentioned you have auto evaluators. Maybe that's the way.
Yeah.
But just curious to know what best practices there.
Yeah. So I think like in the beginning, you always need some human evaluations. And because you're probably not the expert who can judge whether the output is good or not. And once you have like a test set of like 50 to 100 examples, you can actually use LLMs as a judge to score the output as well. And you can see, okay, how well does it line up with the human judgments? And I would also avoid to just have like is it good or not judgment by the experts, but I would try to come up with a scoring rubric. And this goes really back to the experts, try to drill down what makes the output good or not. And then basically create a rubric around that and use that rubric to score with the experts, and then basically also score with the LLMs. And then you basically have like a more fine-grained score, like across multiple dimensions, and you can align the LLM as a judge or your heuristics evaluation across each of those dimensions. And basically, okay, the alignment of my LLM is like 90%. So in 90% of the cases, it tells me the same as the human expert, so it can trust the judgment like to a degree. And then as you go on and you hit like more failure cases, so you hit a case like where it gave an output to a user which wasn't good, you add that to your evaluation suite and basically collect more and more failure cases. And that's the same as ML. As you encounter edge cases, you add them in, look why it failed, and basically iterate on.
If I can add just some things from my perspective of working with like product managers, for example, something that's been really helpful, which is just like adding on what you're saying, helping them understand what these evaluations are and the way that you think about them, and like mapping that to the way that they would typically evaluate something that they're working on, or like how they think about success upfront, and having those conversations before you get into the process, and like level setting on what you plan to do, so they also can set those expectations, and also building it into the plan and into the roadmap, rather than suddenly reaching a point and they were like caught off guard and they don't really understand what these evaluations are. Is just something I'm seeing right now. And I think I think having like a rubric or something that is standardized that they can go back to has been really helpful for people. And then also having like a visualization or showing the like where you need the evaluations to be done, what the outputs are of those, like what the results are, in a way that's a bit more engaging for people. If they're not just an engineer, if they're a product manager or somebody who's maybe less technical, having them engage in a different way that feels like less of a burden or easier to digest has also been helpful.
Yeah, and one of the Hugging Face, I think it's called Agia or something like that. It's like an interface where you can basically display like evaluations or have the user do evaluations. It helps a lot. And once you have set it up once, it's really easy to use. So you can throw in a data set pretty easily and just get them to evaluate. But it always pays to like the first few times sit next to them, guide them through it, and show them how it's done.
Cool. Thank you.
What about Langsmith annotations for human eval? So to be honest, I have used Langsmith, but I've used it before the annotations came out. So I think you have to elaborate a little bit what Langsmith annotations are.
And how do you think about like when you're decomposing these tasks and deciding, and maybe you don't want to necessarily go into multi-agent systems since you're talking about making it as like straightforward as possible. But if you are running into that situation right now where you're like, okay, this task would actually be handled better over here separately, how do you start to think about what that overall organization will look like? Or are you trying to just stay with as specific as possible right now?
So I love like graphs. I think like it's very well explored, and it has a lot of infrastructure and tools already to be deployed just from like data engineering. And Prefect, for example, is building a lot in that, like using LLMs, using AI and making it more dynamic. But I think like graphs as a structure is in general like the way to go in most cases. And I haven't yet found an issue where I really needed multi-agent and couldn't really break down the task in a flow where I have like some if conditions, like some control flow or a loop, which breaks once it has like a passing grade or something like that. And I think like everywhere I looked where agents were implemented, it's in the end, it's a graph. And it's not really this multi-agent construct. I think you can use the multi-agent part in some cases when you're doing a little bit more like creative tasks and stuff like that. But to be honest, the thing that blocks me from using it is like debugging it is really hard. It's like when I add like 8 more agents, will it suddenly start solving it? If I remove one, will it get better? Like, where is the error coming from? Like, which tokens throw the process off? I think it's really hard to debug and really hard to quantify, like, where is it failing and why is it failing and how can I improve? And that's why I actually prefer like the workflow one, because I can evaluate each step, and each step doesn't have to be an LLM call. It can be a retrieval. It can be the LLM call. It could even be like a multi-agent, which does some complex processing. And then I evaluate each step, but make each step small enough so I can actually evaluate and figure out, okay, where am I failing? I just sent it in the chat. So it's Argia. I'm not sure. I think it's Spanish, but my Spanish pronunciation isn't there anymore. No worries. Does anyone else have any questions, or does anyone have any failure or success stories with building agents or workflows?
I don't have any successes yet, but no failures either. I'm just trying to think about what this would look like. I work on more internal tooling across the enterprise, so trying to figure out how to solve really tedious tasks and make it easier to just do basic things that are across a lot of different systems. And so I haven't found the best way to approach that yet.
Yeah, I think in the end, you just like no one wants to spend like the time to actually just sit down with the people who are doing the tasks. But in the end, that's like what brings the most value.
Yeah.
So I think you can get by that. Also, like in general, in consulting projects, what I've learned is like something like timetables. If you have stuff like that in your organizations, it's like a gold mine, because you can actually figure out, okay, what tasks are people spending the most time on? So you don't really have to ask them, because most people really suck at like, okay, I spend this and this much time doing this, or this is the worst task. And I would also just ask people, okay, what is something you just hate doing?
Yeah, that's easy. There's a lot of stuff people hate doing.
Yeah, I can sneak in a question here. See, the time is starting to run out, but I was curious because I was thinking of starting an agentic kind of application with like some extensive tooling, and I've been paying attention to the scene. But I was wondering, do you have some tips for me? Because I'm, knowing what you know now, if you had to start from scratch, what would you like? To some quick start tips or something like that.
I think like first find a problem that's big enough to have a market, but also not too big. So it's hard to like find specific people that you're actually solving it for, and then like just talk to a bunch of people, like 10, 20 interviews before you even start building. And once you have like an idea, okay, what problems does my target group have? Just like tell them you're building something in the space, create a landing page for it with a sign up sheet and see whether they actually signing up. Because people always tell you like, okay, they would buy this, but it's like signing up for a waitlist is like a minimum remark they should do. And if they don't sign up, you haven't found the right problem. And when we talk about like the technical solving of it, I would actually see, okay, how much can you actually solve with actual software? And where is AI really necessary? I think people overuse LLMs, especially because they can do so much stuff. But I think like when you can use software, regular software, use regular software and not AI.